Hey there, welcome back to Virtual Woodshop. In this video, we're going to be designing a nightstand with the intention of teaching you basic cabinet construction. So you could take this and you could apply it to a different design. If you wanted to build a dresser, a desk, a gun cabinet, anything else that uses this basic cabinet construction with a face frame, a box, some trim, door, drawers, whatever you want, you can take this and you can design your own cabinet. So let's get started. All right, designing a cabinet, I like to start with the face frame. You're going to want to decide the overall height and width of your cabinet. I am designing a nightstand for this demonstration, so I want it to be 24 inches tall. However, after I put the top on, that's going to add a little bit of height to this. So instead of making the face frame 24 inches, I have made it 23 1/4 with the intention of adding a top that's 3/4 of an inch thick. Then it will add up to 24 inches. I didn't write it down, but the width would be 18 inches. We have these measurements right here to show how far the rails are from the bottom and top. Now on the nightstand, I only have 2 that need to be dimensioned. If you're doing a dresser or a desk, anything else, you're going to have to add whatever dimensions that you need to. So for the bottom rail, it's going to be 4 1/4 inches from the bottom of the cabinet to the top of that rail. Now, why did I choose 4 1/4? I'm planning on having a piece of base trim across the bottom to cover up this gap, and that base trim will be 3 inches wide. Now you could change that, but 3 inches is a pretty good size. So we subtract 3 inches from that, we get 1 1/4. The door that's going to be covering this will also overlay the face frame 1/2 inch. So we subtract 1/2 inch from 1 1/4, we get 3/4 of an inch left. That's the gap that I will have between the base trim and the door. So that's why I chose 4 1/4. It gives me 3/4 of an inch gap between those 2 pieces. As far as this middle rail goes, this is down 6 1/4. And I could change the size of my drawer, so that could change. This top rail, I usually make 2 1/4 wide. We'll talk about that. The reason for that is I plan on this top hanging over a little bit, about 3/4 of an inch. And then again, the drawer face is going to overlay the face frame 1/2 inch. So we just took out 1 1/4 inches off of that 2 1/4. So that gives me 1 inch gap between the 2. So that's kind of how I figure out those measurements. They don't have to be the same when you design yours, but hopefully that gives you an understanding of how big things should be when you start designing this, when you decide how wide your rails and stiles are, or how far apart things should be. Okay, designing the cut list. This is how I like to lay it out so that I can keep track of things. We've got our face frame drawn over here. I used a ruler, made nice straight lines, added some dimensions so that I know kind of the overall size. Now, I'm going to go to the cut list, and this is where I'm going to write down the size of each piece and how many pieces I need. So to start out, let's start with the stiles. I am going to need 2 stiles. Stiles are these vertical pieces on a face frame. So I will write 2 stiles, and then I need to decide the thickness, width, and length of my pieces. They're all going to be 13/16. That's the thickness for all the pieces. Then our width for our stiles, I told you we're going to make this face frame the cabinet 18 inches wide. But I actually like to add a 1/16 of an inch on each edge of the face frame so that when I attach it to the box, I have a little bit hanging over on each side. And then later we can go trim that off to make it fit exact. We'll go ahead and make those 1 9/16. That's just 1/16 bigger than 1 1/2. Now, if you're doing a bigger cabinet, if you're doing like a big dresser, something taller, bigger, you may want to make those a little bit wider, but they really don't need to be super wide. I probably wouldn't make them over 2 inches wide. Just kind of depends on what you're doing and how it fits in whatever cabinet you're building. Then our length, we see it right here, is 23 1/4. That's the height of our face frame. Thickness, width, and length. For our stiles, we can add our rails. The top rail, I'm actually going to make slightly bigger. Thickness is the same, 13/16. The width of my top rail, I mentioned earlier, is 2 1/4. The length, if we said these stiles are going to be 1.5 inches in the end, so subtract 3 inches from 18, we get 15 inches for the length of those rails. That way it all adds up to 18 in the end. Okay, and then we have our middle and bottom rails are just going to be the same size. So we'll put them together. We need 2 other rails. And they will be 13/16 thick again. I'm just going to make them 2 inches wide. And again, 15 inches long. Same length as the other. Okay, moving on to the box of our cabinet. I'm demonstrating with a nightstand. You may be doing a different piece of furniture or cabinet. That's okay. We've already designed a face frame. Our face frame was 18 inches wide and 23 1/4 tall, just like the box. So overall dimensions are the same. Only difference was the face frame. We made the stiles a 1/16 bigger. So in all reality, the face frame is going to be hanging over a 1/16 on each edge here. We're going to trim that off after it's attached to the box. So in the end, they will both be 18 inches. This dimension here, 4 1/4, will match up with the top of the bottom rail on our face frame. Everything matches up here. Going over to the cut list, we are going to have 2 sides, a bottom, a top, and then a back piece. I didn't draw an angle to view that, but we'll go ahead and include it in our cut list. We should be able to figure it out. So we're going to need 2 sides. The thickness on all of these, except for the back, is going to be 3/4 of an inch. We're just going to use 3/4 inch MDF. The width will determine the depth of our cabinet. This one, I am going to do 15 inches deep. So we'll just go ahead and write 15 there. And the length of this piece of the side is the height. So 23 1/4. Okay, we got the sides done. Let's start with the bottom. That bottom piece is going to be the width of our cabinet, except we're going to have a little less on each end. Now, joints are an important part of building a cabinet. For the box, we're going to be using dado joints for the bottom shelf and a rabbet for the top, which is essentially the same thing. The only difference is a rabbet is done on the edge of a board. The dado is somewhere in the middle. Okay, so this board on the bottom is actually going into the sides 1/4 inch, both ways. So the overall width is 18. We subtract 1/2 inch on each side, and we get 17 inches for the length of that piece. Okay, 3/4 is still the thickness. And our width, again, is the depth, which is 15 inches. However, I'm going to have a back panel on the back of this cabinet, and that's going to be 1/4 inch thick. So I'm actually going to make the bottom shelf 1/4 of an inch shorter so that that back panel can fit behind it. So instead of 15, we will do 14 3/4. For the top, it needs to be 3/4 thick and 17 inches long, but the width isn't as big of a deal here because you're not going to see this. If you want to make a whole piece 14 3/4, you can, or you can just use a couple scrap pieces to bring that together. That is our top. And we need a back. Okay, the back of this box is going to be 1/4 inch MDF. So that's where it changes on the thickness. The width of this piece is going to be the same as our top and bottom. This will be 17. The length, we're going to go from the top, and we're just going to stop when we get to the bottom of this shelf. We're not going to go all the way to the floor. It just gets in the way. So we subtract 3 1/2 inches from the floor to the bottom of the shelf. 23 1/4 minus 3 1/2, 19 3/4. Kind of a lot. Hopefully that makes sense how we got these dimensions. Hope you guys can see those okay. If you have any questions, comment or send me an email. Email is the best. I will respond more quickly. All right. Good luck.